Etienne Mercier used to claim that food was the only honest language left in Paris. A splash of Armagnac could flirt, an anchovy could lie, and a patient mirepoix could confess sins no priest ever heard. On the night his third Michelin star was announced, he floated through Le Papillon's kitchen as lightly as the yuzu foam atop his sea urchin royale. Orders flew in, copper pans hissed, and every flick of his wrist felt predestined. He tasted constantly. Little silver spoons tapped along the pass like coins in a fountain, and each mouthful told him whether the dish whispered, chuckled, or sang. 2 days later, he woke in a ward whose disinfectant reek overpowered everything else. A gas leak in his apartment building, the intern explained. Etienne had been found unconscious. The doctors ran scans, frowned at charts, and shrugged at the result. His tongue was intact, his olfactory bulbs unscathed, yet flavor had abandoned him as completely as an unfaithful lover. Agesia, they called it. Most patients recovered, but no one could say when. He tried not to panic. At first, he told himself that taste, like marijuana smoke, lingered in the curtains. It would drift back. He tore through the hospital's plastic-domed intrigues, braised veal, chocolate pudding, even corn chips smuggled in by a junior cook, and every bite was cardboard, not bland, absent. The spoons tapped no more. 4 nights into this exile, Etienne shuffled toward the vending machine, driven by phantom cravings. An orderly wheeled past, and a young woman stalled in the corridor, her face waxy with dread. A surgeon, still gloved, murmured that her father's heart had failed. The woman made a sound like paper tearing. As it clawed the hallway, Etienne heard another thing, a high, bright chord of scent, elusive as jasmine on the wind. He tore open the packet of peanuts he'd bought without thinking, tossed one into his mouth, and froze. Salt, warm oil, some shy, buttery sweetness that spread like morning across his palate. It lasted only 3 heartbeats, then vanished, and with it the fragrance. The grieving daughter stared through him as if he were furniture. Etienne slipped back to his room, palms trembling, crunching the rest of the peanuts in panicked hope, but they were dust again. He replayed the moment like a sommelier dissecting terroir. The only variable had been the woman's terror, raw and undiluted. He needed more evidence. Released a week later, Etienne returned to a flat that smelled of charred plastic and fresh paint. Friends brought casseroles. He'd tasted nothing. But when a pal suggested watching the classic horror film Les Gorges Sanguines, Etienne agreed, suppressing a flutter of hope. Halfway through the film's famous throat-slitting scene, his friend yelped, knuckles whitening on the sofa arm. Etienne lifted a leftover gougere to his mouth. Cheddar vaulted from the pastry like fireworks, followed by nutmeg, egg, a whisper of smoke from the Gruyere rind. The scene ended, the flavor drowned. He pressed pause, rewound, begged his friend to watch the same grisly segment again, but the second viewing stirred only faint unease, insufficient fuel. The gougere died on his tongue. It was impossible, grotesque, intoxicating. Etienne stood at the hinge of a miracle and a curse. If fear restored flavor, then flavor was no longer a right, but a predator, roused only by the scent of prey. He spent weeks in clandestine experiments. He invited acquaintances to tastings of experimental cuisine, then staged minor panics, a pyrotechnic flare that spat sparks, a live eel that snapped loose. Whenever the room's pulse spiked, his mouth blossomed into color. When calm seeped back, everything turned to dust. The cravings came next. Each hit of real taste vanished too quickly, like vapor inhaled through silk. The memory of any dish, indeed his entire identity, as a culinary maestro, dangled just out of reach, like a soufflé collapsing behind glass. And so, Etienne did what any addict, certain of his moral superiority, does. He rationalized. Was fear not primal, an ancient spice? Didn't a roller coaster sell terror by the ticket? If diners left exhilarated and sated, had anyone truly been harmed? He reopened the Papillon under the guise of renovation and surprise. Out went the tasteful dove-gray walls. In came aubergine velvet and obsidian mirrors that distorted reflections. Candles guttered in draughts, engineered by hidden vents. Etienne commissioned a sound designer to lace the dining room with near subsonic rumbles like distant thunder. On the first night of the new concept, a queue formed before dusk. The amuse-bouche was a demure sphere of cucumber gelatin balanced on a porcelain spoon. Nothing scary about that. Yet when patrons lifted it to their lips, the house lights flickered and hissed. A cold draft prowled under the tables. Someone gasped. Silver clattered. Etienne tasted the cucumber as though for the first time in his life. Fresh-cut grass at dawn. A raindrop, a faint afterimage of Milan. He closed his eyes, cheeks wet. The course ended. The static cleared. The next bite turned ashen again. He needed more. Reviews detonated across Paris. Le Papillon, they wrote, was theater, séance, culinary dare. Diners compared the experience to staring down a cliff and being shoved into flight. The Michelin inspectors returned incognito. Etienne fed them a truffle cappuccino timed with the false scream of a smoke alarm. They awarded a rare 4th star. Invented or not, and the waitlist ballooned to 6 months. But fear, like any narcotic, demands escalation. A trembling spoon that once bought an hour of pleasure now petered out in minutes. Etienne's mise en place grew increasingly baroque. A hidden panel disgorged hissing steam. A maitre d' faked an epileptic collapse. The fish course arrived twitching, eyes wide. Each stunt procured a fresh high, each high dimmer than the last. His staff noticed. Camus whispered that chef's pupils dilated whenever patrons panicked, that his hands shook between courses. The sous chef, Lila Boyer-Sharp, principled and unlucky enough to love him, cornered Etienne after service. "You time the frights," she accused. "It's a circus." "Cuisine must evolve," he replied, wiping a spotless knife. "At what cost?" He almost told her the truth, because the honesty in her voice stirred something that had nothing to do with appetite. But her worry carried a faint rivulet of fear, and the scent of almond rose wove through it. He felt saliva pool beneath his tongue. He stepped back, terrified of what he might do, terrified, and therefore impossibly alive. Newspapers sniffed a scandal when a diner fainted during a blackout episode staged to mimic an electrical fault. Etienne paid the hospital bill and doubled down, announcing a secret chambre noire experience. 8 seats in a sub-basement, blindfolds mandatory, menu undisclosed. He sourced ingredients whose textures were borderline obscene. A bologna that quivered like muscle, sea grapes that popped between the teeth like knuckles. He hired a failed actor named Jacques to prowl the perimeter, whispering nursery rhymes in reverse. On opening night, the host confiscated phones, and the elevator groaned 6 stories underground. Etienne watched from a monitor as guests fumbled at silverware, nerves spraying. He almost missed the old rhythms of cooking, heat, salt, yes, no. But then Jacques scraped a knife across the wall, and the room inhaled his one. Etienne bit into a sliver of charred peach, meant for the next course. It tasted of everything childhood promised and adulthood denied. Sunburn, bicycle spokes, stolen sugar. Tears pricked his eyes. He swallowed, and a bottomless hunger opened beneath him, howling. Afterward, guests staggered out, praising the brilliance. 2 signed waivers to return. 1 vomited on the curb. The newspapers dedicated full spreads. Investors courted him. And still the abyss yawned inside, demanding. Etienne's dreams rotted. He'd wake with the echo of screams in his ear and the phantom tang of caramel on his tongue. He tried therapy. The polite psychologist showed no fear and thus tasted like styrofoam. He tried sex. Partners disappointed him unless their moans tipped toward panic, and the recognition sickened him. Meanwhile, Lila studied him with a scientist's patience. One dawn she followed him to the walk-in, where he was orchestrating a dead pigeon to appear alive with hidden wires, an illusion planned for a VIP critic. She flipped on the light. "You'll kill someone," she said, voice cracking. Her fear arrived not as almond this time, but as a fierce, peppery coriander that detonated inside him. The craving smashed his restraint. He plucked a slice of Wagyu from a tray, raw and glistening, and crammed it into his mouth. The marbling melted like prayer on the tongue, and he groaned. Lila took 1 step back. Understanding dawned in her eyes. an unbearable pity that acidified into revulsion. "Get help, Etienne." He nodded, jaw working, tears leaking. She left him there, meat blood on his lips. Days later, the critic Daphne Beaumont, a titan capable of anointing or annihilating empires, arrived for her private seating. Etienne had prepared the basement as a catacomb, candles choking in their own wax, air perfumed with iron like wet coins. He wore a tailored chef's jacket that fit him like penitence. Daphne's blasé smile never fluttered, no matter the spectacle. The dead pigeon danced. She arched an eyebrow. Jacques rasped lullabies. She called them derivative. Etienne began to sweat. Each course was a masterpiece wasted on cardboard. He felt panic, but not fear, and panic offered no flavor. Desperate, he escorted her to the wine cellar under pretext of pairing consultation. There, amid dusky bottles, he locked the door. Daphne's posture stiffened at the click. The corkscrew in his hand gleamed. "Jeff?" she asked, voice angled between irritation and alarm. The scent struck him like whiskey poured over embers. Deep, smoky cinnamon. Flavor exploded across his palate, though he'd eaten nothing. It was her fear itself, distilled, saturating the air. For a moment, he floated outside of time, mouth open, eyes fluttered shut. When he surfaced, Daphne pressed against a rack, assessing escape routes. Escape routes. Etienne saw himself through her gaze, gaunt, hollow-cheeked, corkscrew poised like an ice pick. What would one lunge give him? A symphony of taste that might last minutes. And afterward? Headlines, handcuffs, a lifetime of gray gruel. He dropped the tool. Daphne shoved past him, sprinted up the stairs, shouting for help. The cellar doors slammed. Etienne remained among the bottles, sobs racking his chest, grateful and grieving. The cinnamon vapor faded, and with it all flavor. The scandal detonated by morning. Daphne threatened police. Etienne's lawyer negotiated silence in exchange for a 7-figure donation to culinary scholarships and the shuttering of Le Papillon. Investors fled. Frightened staff cut ties. Only Lila returned, not to comfort but to witness the burial. They met in the gutted dining room while movers dismantled chandeliers. "I've tasted nothing for 6 weeks," Etienne confessed, voice raw. "Good," she said, though tears glazed her lashes. "You need the hunger to go." "What if it never does?" "Then feed it something else." She left him with a box of his silver tasting spoons, useless as relics. Etienne sold the lease, the patent rights, even the name Le Papillon. Reporters speculated he'd fled to Bangkok or rehab. Instead, he traveled to Meira-sur-Cher, a river village with no train station and one cafe. He rented a stone cottage with a crooked hearth, and for a year he cooked alone, seasoning by memory and mathematics. 5 grams of salt per liter of stock, 3 of sugar per kiss of vinegar. Neighbors sometimes knocked, intrigued by the aromas, and left with jars of sorrel pesto or confit tomatoes. They returned, not out of fear but affection. The hunger inside Etienne slept, but never quite died. Some nights he'd wake to the phantom scent of coriander or cinnamon and weep until sunrise. One stormy evening, an adolescent boy arrived, face pale beneath a wet hoodie. "My mother's gone," he stammered. "Ambulances stuck flooded road." The child's terror crawled the air like ozone. Etienne felt saliva surge as if a gun had cocked behind his teeth. He could taste again, right then, though nothing touched his tongue. A panorama of flavors, seductive, kaleidoscopic. The beast stretched, eager. Etienne clutched the doorframe hard enough to splinter it, and chose. He packed towels, kettle, first aid kit, followed the boy into rain. The mother lay on a sofa, feverish, bronchial tubes rattling. Etienne brewed thyme tea, cooled it with honey, propped her upright, coached her through each sip until sirens sliced the storm. All the while, terror pulsed in the small house. All the while, his mouth filled with an imaginary feast he refused to swallow. When the paramedics departed, the boy hugged Etienne, gratitude dissolving fear into exhausted relief. As the emotion ebbed, so did the flavors, disintegrating like snowflakes on the tongue. What remained was a faint aftertaste, not of spice or fruit, but of calm. Simple, unmistakable, enough. The next morning, Etienne assembled a crude sign outside the cottage. Cuisine communautaire. Repas gratuitis. People arrived. The elderly, farmers between plantings, children chasing aromas. They ate, they thanked, they left. Many carried worries, few carried outright fear. And Etienne could not taste his own dishes, but the tranquility in their faces seasoned the room in a way no basil ever could. On a mild afternoon the following spring, Leela appeared. She accepted a bowl of nettle soup, sampling it with a familiar critical tilt of her head. "Needs salt," she teased, sliding the shaker toward him. He grinned, letting the joke stand. They ate together at a scarred wooden table, sun striping through the shutters. No flicker of fear stirred the air, and so the soup was linen in his mouth, blank, silent. Yet Etienne felt sated. Perhaps this too was taste, the warmth of another presence, the hum of a kettle, the simple grammar of enough. Enough. Far away in Paris, diners told dark legends of Le Papillon, of the chef who served nightmares so delicious they bruised the soul. But in a village the maps forgot. Etienne learned a quieter language. And though his tongue lay dormant, sometimes, when laughter shook the rafters or gratitude caught like light on water, a ghost of flavor drifted across his palate, fragile, fleeting, and sweeter than any fear he'd ever sown.